Hello, my name is László STRAUSZ. I work at the Film Studies department at Eötvös Loránd University. The Film Studies department is part of the Institute for Art Theory and Media Studies. Students who study with us can either decide to go with the filmmaking specialization, which focuses on practical aspects of filmmaking, or they can do a degree program in film theory and film history, which is something that is probably more interesting for students who look forward or who plan on doing other kinds of non-production related work. My own specialty in the department is related to both theory and history. And I also teach a lot of film criticism and film interpretation classes. But my field of specialization is Eastern Europe and Eastern European cinema in relation to history. And I'm very much excited about the ways in which the past history has been represented both on the television screens and on the film screens. So in this sense, the relationship between moving images and society is a very important connection for me. In the courses that I teach, that I have been recently teaching, I try to communicate and follow with my students the development that has been taking place in the thinking about the medium itself. For almost 50 years, or probably even longer, moving images have been imagined as a phenomenon or as a cultural object which imitates or mirrors social developments. There is a very famous book written by a German historian and film scholar, Siegfried Kracauer, who wrote a famous book with the title From Caligari to Hitler, in which he follows the development of German society in between German expressionistic cinema and the rise of the Nazi Party in 1933. This is a very famous book because it proposes that cinema and art in general mirrors something that is already going on in society. I cannot put an exact year to this, but from the late 60s, I would propose from the 1970s onwards, scholars have been thinking about motion pictures in a more complex way. And I like to call this relationship between the moving image and society a two-way relationship in which films and television texts do not only mirror and imitate passively what is going on around the institution of the cinema in society, but actively contribute to the shaping of new ideas, new stereotypes, new beliefs, or new value systems. And since the 1960s, 70s onwards, there's a large number of exciting books and monographs that have been written about this topic. How does cinema as an art form, as a cultural object, impact the ways in which people think about the world? One example that I could mention here is a recent book by British film scholar Lee Grieveson with the title Cinema and the Wealth of Nations, in which he proposes that cinema has been instrumental in the formation of liberal capitalism in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. To return to my own focus and the focus of the work that I am doing as an instructor in the department, the relationship between history and cinema is undoubtedly a very complex relationship. And many times the question of authenticity emerges. In public discourses, when people encounter a television show or a film that deals with the past, one of the central questions very often is how accurately does a given television show or a film represent a given era? There are many examples for this, also from the recent past in Hungary. HBO, for example, produced a television show called The Informant, around which fascinating debates started to emerge in the popular media and in the press. And interestingly, one of the central questions was how accurately does the television show represent the state socialist years and the work of the secret services. Instead of emphasizing the question of authenticity, I propose that there are many other interesting questions that we can ask in relationship with historical texts, historical motion pictures or television shows with a historical topic. For example, what is the style that the filmmaker uses when he or she represents the past? What kind of emotions do the characters who portray historical characters depict when they play certain parts in these television shows or films? Who are the chosen individuals who represent a certain social group? What does a student leader look like, for example, in the 1980s? And also, what genres do these television shows use? Is it a melodramatic text? Is it a television show or film that uses a thriller as the larger framework, which is to say crime genres? Is it a romantic comedy that influences the details of this motion picture? So there's many other interesting questions to ask when we interrogate the ways in which the past and history has been represented in a motion picture format. Another concept that is often mentioned in this context is the role of nostalgia. What role does nostalgia play in television shows that depict the past? And more specifically, in my case, what I am interested in as a scholar and as a researcher is the ways in which state socialism has been represented in cinema and on the television screens. Interestingly, the state socialist past has received a lot of attention recently, both in television and filmic formats. And I wanted to mention here a few examples here of globally successful Eastern European films about a socialist past that have gone on and made a big career globally, receiving a large number of awards, such as the 1994 film Underground by Bosnian Serbian filmmaker Emir Kusturica, in which the socialist past becomes wrapped up in a fairy tale where the protagonist creates a dream world in a cellar for his companions where they are not allowed to have any contact with the outside world. So history flies over their heads and they have little interaction with the outside world. So socialism is represented as a cellar, almost like a prison. And this film went on to receive major awards at Cannes and various other European festivals after its production. The other example that comes to my mind is the film The Lives of Others, directed by Donnersmarck in 2006, in which we follow the story of a Stasi agent who changes his mind while surveying a dissident artist in the former GDR. And this character has also been the object of various debates. Would have been possible or not during the state socialist years. Some people argued that that is impossible. Stasi agents were themselves surveyed by the apparatus of the state. But interestingly, here again, we see the same topic coming up, the question of authenticity. Could this have happened, or would it have been impossible for this to happen under state socialism? This is also a film which offers a different approach to the past, where the genre of the thriller and the emotions that the thriller creates in the viewer allows or creates an entry point for audiences to entertain some of the moral and social political conflicts that the film revolves around. Another good example here is Paweł Pawlikowski's 2018 film Cold War, which went on to receive an Academy Award for Best Foreign Picture the year after it was made. So even though these examples that I mentioned right now come from 2 or 2.5 decades, there is a visible interest and a visible focus internationally on the ways in which this bygone era and the Eastern European perspectives on the Cold War have reached the screens. I think that this is also the case when we turn to television. There is a fair number of television shows that have turned to socialism as a topic. And many of these television shows use the thriller genre to uncover historical conflicts. A very good example of this is the television show Burning Bush, produced by HBO in 2013, which revolves around the events of the Velvet Revolution, 1968 in Prague, and the aftermath of this revolution of that year. Another example is the Netflix show 1983, which uses a science fiction context to imagine and reimagine what socialism could have turned into had the system not come down in the Eastern European regime changes of 1989. So we have seen already a thriller example, a science fiction example, but probably the best known television show that turns to socialism, state socialism, is the HBO show Chernobyl, which investigates the political mistakes and the political decisions that led to the nuclear meltdown at the power plant of Chernobyl. The last example is the Hungarian HBO show The Informant that I already mentioned in this lecture today, which revolves around the circumstances of being hired by the secret services and informing on student movements during the mid-1980s. So as these examples have shown, none of these screen productions are interested, or for that matter, invested in creating an authentic image of the past. Much rather, they propose that we analyze the ways in which they recreate the past. And I will propose here, and at the end of my presentation today, that the past and history is used by various social groups and various social actors in a large variety of ways. Politicians and journalists and historians and academics all use the past for a different way, and it is more helpful for us to think about these uses of history or these uses of the past as a communicative process in which the past is used for a specific purpose. So in that sense, instead of overemphasizing authenticity, in my university courses about films or television shows about the past, I try to motivate my students to ask other types of questions. How does a specific film recreate historical events? And what is the reason for these manipulations or changes or reinterpretations of the past? What kind of statements can we make about these historical constructions, or we could also say about these fictional recreations of, for example, the secret services, whether in former East Germany or state socialist Hungary? How are these representations read by the audiences? How do the audiences use the past? And what does it mean when a global conglomerate such as HBO decides that 3 months after its release on the streaming platform, they pull the entire show? I'm talking right now about the Hungarian show The Informant, which disappeared from the HBO platform barely 3 months after this has been released. So we analyze public discourses around that, and we try to draw conclusions from not just the films themselves, but the institutions that surround filmmaking and the multiple public discourses that try to interpret and analyze what the past means for us today.